Hello, everyone! Welcome to another Mysterious Galaxy virtual event. I am Nick, the Director of Events and Digital Marketer of the store. As you can see, I am joined by, not the Brady Bunch, but three wonderful authors here. We are celebrating Ren Hutching's release of Under Fortunate Stars. Yay! Joining in conversation, we, of course, have authors Mike Chen and K.B. Wagers. Hello!
Hello, everybody.
So all three authors are wise and wonderful, and they have submitted signed book plates for anyone who decides to buy any one of their books. But not only that, but Ren has gone the extreme length and is also providing swag packs, wonderful swag packs with signed book plates and more for anyone who buys Under Unfortunate Stars. That's what they look like. So if you still have not yet gotten your copy, we still have more at the store to get. Yes, I agree, Emily. Go Ren. Ren Hutchings is a speculative fiction writer, mentor, and history grad. She spent most of the past decade working in game development while also plotting twisty space novels. Mike Chen, who we just saw at Star Wars Celebration, is a critically acclaimed science fiction author based out of San Francisco Bay Area. His debut novel, Here and Now and Then, was a finalist for the Goodreads Choice, Kaliba, Golden Poppy, and Compton Crook Awards. Last month, he just saw the release of his Star Wars Brotherhood. And K.B. Wagers is the author of the Neo-G adventures from Harper Voyager, including A Pale Light in the Black and Hold Fast Through the Fire, in Andranin and Farian War trilogies from Orbit Books. They just recently saw the paperback release of Hold Fast Through the Fire, which you can still get from Mysterious Galaxy and get a signed book plate. All right, I'm going to go disappear now and leave it to these wonderful authors to take it away from the conversation, but I'll see you halfway through the event to pose some wonderful questions you may all have. I'll see you later.
Thank you, Nick.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
So should we start by saying high five to Ren for her big debut? And Ren, this is your show. Like, we're just like the support acts for this.
Yeah.
We're the opening bands.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here. I love both of your books, and I'm just super excited to be sitting here now as one of you doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I should introduce my book if anybody is watching who has not read the description of my book. This is it right here. Beautiful cover by Dominic Forbes, my cover designer. I love this cover so much. I am never going to get tired of it. Under Fortunate Stars is a space opera. It's about accidental time travel, and it's about a history nerd to the rescue and the perils of meeting your heroes. It is told in multiple points of view across two timelines, and one of the main characters is the aforementioned history nerd, Uma, who has loved history for her whole life. She knows everything about this particular period in history at the end of an interstellar war that had been going on for several generations. She's especially interested in these 5 human heroes called the Fortunate Five, who ended this interstellar war 152 years before her time. But what she never expected was to actually come face to face with them, which is exactly what happens through an encounter with a time anomaly. And she finds that they're not quite as she expected them to be. They are not exactly as history recorded them. A lot of things about their lives and the choices they've made are not quite what she expected, and they are not on the right mission, which is a problem. So that is the premise, and I really hope that people will enjoy this book.
You want to tell us a little bit more about where it came from? Like, how long were you working on it? Because I know with first books, most people wind up working on them for like off and on for a while as like they evolve from like their initial idea and as they become better on a craft level.
Yeah, it's an idea that I had for a long time, and I went through several iterations with it. It was originally a NaNoWriMo project a few years ago, and it had a completely different premise at the time, which was it was originally about a group of historical reenactors, like LARPers who got accidentally transported back to the event that they were recreating. That is
That
definitely
sounds really
not,
awesome.
that
Perhaps
plot
that should be a
changed a
spin-off.
lot. The plot changed a lot since then, but the character arcs and a lot of the sort of themes and the other storyline within that, like the time travel plot line, have stayed very much the same ever since then. And the one of the main characters still is very much that history nerd, and there's a few little nods to that that original concept still in there. So Uma, she used to belong to a historical society. She has restored like a vintage ship that was used in a documentary. There's little shards of that still in there, but I think the book, I originally wrote the story, like the very first kind of outline, I guess, if you want to call it that. I don't outline. This is a lie. It was a concept which had some scenes written for it all the way back in 2013. And I didn't come back to it for a long time because I kind of didn't really know where I was going with it. I had some characters, I had the inciting incident, and I had the ending. You know, I've always known the kind of shape of the story, but the rest of it just took a while to come to me, and it took a while for me to figure out exactly what I wanted to do with the structure of it and pull it together. I think once I figured that out, it's pretty heavily influenced by the structure of the show Lost. If you've ever seen the show Lost, it tells a separate story in flashbacks where you go back in different characters' lives and find out things that connected them together that sometimes the characters themselves aren't aware of, but you find out, you know, the kind of how we got here of their journey. And there's kind of these two stories being told in parallel. And ever since I first saw that show, I've wanted to write something that felt like it. And when it clicked into place that this book was that book, that's kind of when I came back to it and started redrafting it again a few years later.
Ren, what's one of your favorite scenes out of the book?
Ooh, my favorite scene. So the first scene that I wrote for this book is actually still in there. And it's almost exactly the same as it was when I first wrote it. It is the scene where the galleon crew first get the distress call from the Jonah, which is this famous historical ship, and all the reactions that the different characters have to hearing this. So they get this transmission, which is basically seems to be this antique ship claiming to be a very famous historical vessel from their past. And you kind of get the different reactions from the crew. Disbelief, completely, you know, anger. Why, you know, is this a hoax? What's happening? Because they're also dealing with a ship emergency at the same time. The fact that they can't contact the network. But I think that that's actually a really good introduction to the really big group cast on the galleon. And you kind of get to see the personalities of some of the crew members for the first time in their reaction to this completely fantastical event that they're faced with.
I just lost my list of questions. So I'm like, oh no, I can't do anything without my notes.
Your phone fell off. You're
Katie, help. Improvise something.
So we'll slide right into the time travel discussion, because I know that was one of my favorite things. Beyond the sort of really uplifting message of hope that the book has, and is sort of something that I know a lot of us have really been grabbing onto lately, given the state of the world. But it's one of my absolute favorite time travel paradoxes, which is where the time travelers essentially find themselves in the position of making the future, or of making the history that they have found, have heard about their whole lives. Why is that? Was that just something that was part of your original LARP idea, or was that something sort of deliberate that you kind of wove into the story itself? How did you come to that?
Well, I think that there's just so many different ways to write time travel stories. I think I love so many different types of time travel. There's a lot of, both in potentially in science, in theoretical science and in fiction, there's a lot of different ideas about, how would that really work? Are there parallel universes? Does every action kind of create something new? Or can you even change something? Or can you go back and become part of something that's always happened? Was it always that way? And I think that one thing that I've always been compelled by is when time travel happens accidentally and you don't know like what flavor of time travel it is, how do people react when they don't actually know how those actions are going to potentially reflect into history, or whether they can even do anything to affect it at all? And that's the situation that these characters find themselves in, because they didn't time travel on purpose. They were basically having a fairly regular day at the office, sort of. And they're in turnover, which means their ship was in between rotations of staff. So they have a kind of a skeleton crew. They're also ferrying an alien ambassador at the time, which is like a little bit of an unusual situation for them. They're usually a research vessel, so they don't normally do that. So they're a little bit, they're very preoccupied with making sure that this all goes well. And then, of course, something happens, and it is the fact that they lose communication with the network. They encounter this anomaly, but none of them are like specialists in time travel or have any kind of like manual about this. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting with the character relationships is how they try to convince one another of different, theories about what's going on, or whether or not they should attempt to, as you say, make the history happen the way that it should, and what that even means.
Yeah.
So, Ren, you mentioned before that you don't really plot or outline.
No.
So I want to throw this to
not.
both of you, because I'm like, what's the in between term for? Is it
Plantser? I think it's
Plantser. Yes. So what I do is like I take I create a beat sheet, and then I break that beat sheet into acts, and then in those acts, like I kind of like write out what I think a chapter summary will be, and then like I build out from there. But I'm very flexible. Like I'm willing to move things around if I feels like, no, this character should die here or whatever. But I'm always curious to see what other writers' processes are. So Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yours first?
I love this question because I have no process.
I was gonna say, I bet you're a chaos demon.
High five.
I am a complete chaos gremlin when it comes to outlining. Like, just to give an example, I wrote the outlines for 2 of the 3 In Drawn and War books after they had been published. Like long out, like,
reverse outlining
time
to
travel
the
thing,
right? Like there was
extreme reverse.
There was a whole time travel thing. It just for the first for folks who are joining, I have written 7 books in 4 years, 5 years. I've lost track. So a great deal of my writing is like this panicked, like trying to hit deadline, which doesn't leave a whole lot of time for outlining. And my brain also seems to not work very well with outlines. Like after I have written an outline for something, my brain is like, good, story's done. We're just gonna go over here now, and you don't have to write it anymore. In fact, we're gonna refuse to write it. In fact, when I'm working on the 3rd Neo G book last fall, when I turned it in, I was like 30,000 words into it, and I had written an outline because they require it. So I have written a couple of outlines. But I was about 30,000 words into the book and was like, well, I know what the outline is. I'm fine. And then decided to look at the outline and realized that I had like veered relatively wildly away from what we had discussed and agreed upon for the book. So yeah, I am full on like chaos gremlin and still sort of figuring out. I usually start with an idea of what I want to do, almost like just an elevator pitch of the book. And then, from there, I let the characters kind of take the wheel and we'll see what happens. And it results in a lot more edit rounds generally, because you have to go back and fix stuff when you suddenly realize the plot's not going to work. But
do you draft in order? like beginning to end, or
yes and no. I do I write scenes as they come a lot of times, so I will generally have scenes ahead of time that I know I'm working towards. Like Mike said, that doesn't always happen. Like you have to be flexible enough to where you're like, I love this scene and it no longer fits with what's going on. You know, for Down Among the Dead, which is the second book in the Farian War, I had a great scene with Hal all written out, and then was like, when I got to it, it didn't fit what had happened anymore. So yeah, I tend to bounce around, and I'll have a running kind of outline-ish thing at the bottom of the document that's just what's happening in the next 3 chapters. What, you know, what am I shooting for? Where are we going?
Yeah.
You know, what important stuff needs to be added in at various points, that sort of thing. Like, don't forget to mention the bookshelf.
What about from a trilogy perspective? Because like this is something that I write everything standalone. So I'm always fascinated with when people write in the series, and like, do you know where you're going already? Or are you just like, well, I'm on contract, I gotta figure something out?
Legitimately, it's that. Like that again. Both. It's so terrible. I'm like,
writer's secrets.
People are always like, "This is so well planned out." And I'm like, "Listen, it was about 90% desperation and 10% edits." So, the timeline was so tight for both the Indranan and the Farian War trilogy that we had a vague idea of what needed to happen for the overall series arc, but no, like there was the end, like one of the reveals in the end of the Indranan War was legitimately me trying to like figure, like reading through the first 2 books going, come on, there's got to be something in here that I can use to like wrap this whole thing together. And yeah, I would hope like at some point, I actually have a duology kind of planned out that has like some coherent plan ahead of time. So
you'll have to let us know if it actually ends up that way next time when we come back.
I had to shelve it. I was kind of bummed. It is a non-hopeful book, and we'd been doing a lot of work on it at the beginning of this year, and then I finally had to like acknowledge that even if we could sell it to somebody, I was not going to write it. Like I did not want to go down that road right now. Like I need to write something that's going to make me happy, and that book is full of people who are not decent human beings. So
yeah, the world has enough of those right now. Right? Ren, what did so I know you had your original LARP version, and then you revised this. So how did your process evolve? Like, and then you're probably writing. Are you writing the second book right now?
It's a standalone. So this is it. There's no second book at the moment. I wouldn't rule out writing something else in the same universe because there's a lot that could be explored. But I mean, this story is finished. It's very complete. I didn't actually get terrible. Did my process change for the book that I'm writing right now? Absolutely not.
Yes.
I did exactly the same thing again. You always get that question, like, what did you learn from doing this? Like, whatever I learned, I didn't put it into any kind of practice. I immediately threw it away and did exactly the same thing as I did the first time. I guess that the closest thing that I come to like an outline is more of like a vibes document, like just ideas. A character that does this, or there could be a scene with this, right? But they're not in any kind of order. I draft completely out of order to the point that sometimes the scenes like contradict each other in the order. That I have a scene that acts like something already happened that hasn't happened yet. When I come to write that, it references something that had to happen. A large part of my process is just sorting that out and actually putting it into a kind of order that works, rewriting multiple versions of the same scene over time. And I also dramatically overwrite. So the first draft of this book that was finished was over like 200,000 words. And so I had to cut 60,000 words between the first finished draft and when I queried it to query agents. And that was probably the hardest. the hardest thing to do is to rearrange a book that's already quite like interlocking, right? It's kind of it's non-linear, and it's a kind of a puzzle box of a structure where everything hangs on everything else. And I really had to take it apart, like completely take it apart and put it back together to come up with the version that eventually went out to agents. And then it hasn't changed a whole ton since then. I'd say like my revisions between then and the book that got published are fairly minimal. Like so many more edits happened before, like in those very early revisions.
Mike, do you, since Ren just mentioned that it was 200,000 words, are you an overwriter or
No. So this is part of my plotting process. I write in these layers. So I'm actually starting my I'm doing like my zero draft of my next book right now, which I'm attempting a time loop. I have no idea if this is actually going to work, but it's already sold, so
it's already sold to me. Where's the pre-order button?
Like too late.
I'll also say that like I am trying to write as much of it like as close to romance as I can get for someone like me. So we'll see. But so my zero draft of, so I write in acts. So act 1, act 2A, 2B, and then 3. And I find this is part of my process because I find that if I really can perfect act 1, then every subsequent act is easier to write because I know the characters then. Because I had this really horrible thing happen when I was writing Light Years from Home, and I wrote a first half and I sent it to a beta reader, the wonderful Kat Howard, who is an amazing writer. And she said, it's not working. And I'm like, oh no. Because I had tried to do, actually, Ren, what you talked about with the past timeline and the present timeline and how they like kind of coalesce. And I was going there, and then Kat was like, the past timeline is not working at all. It's just like, you need flashbacks, but you can't put this linearly because it's like none of this is working. And I had to just like blow it up and do the whole thing over again. And so that was a really big lesson where I'm like, if I had written 100,000 words and started over, that's like way more work than like finding out at 50,000 words that this is not working. So part of it is just saving myself from grief later. But yeah, I'm an underwriter. So like what I'm doing right now, my target for each act in a good first draft is about 20 to 25,000 words. My zero draft that I just hit today for this act 1 is about 8,000 words. There's a lot of placeholders, like bullet points,
that's amazing.
Like where I'm trying to like write prose and like the prose is not happening because I don't know the characters yet. So I just bullet point out, like it's like stage direction. Like they walk here, they talk about this. Sometimes dialogue comes in. And now I feel like I have a sense of these people. So now I'm going to go back and try to like rebuild that. So I am always trying to like fill words back in. The only thing I cut at the very end is like I try to shave off like 2,000 or 3,000 words of like my terrible, like the filler words that we're prone to using. Like just is like the worst for me. I'm always describing eyes for some reason, so I have to like control F.
Color. I'm very interested in what color people's eyes are.
I'm just like very envious of this process because you actually have room to add things. Like I'm trying to cut things, and every time I come to revise, like it gets bigger. I'm like, oh, okay, I have like this. I'm done Act 1, and it's 84,000 words. Like,
is it because of world building? I'm really curious about this because it's like everyone else in our field loves world building, and I just freaking hate it, and I'm terrible at it. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm going to add all these details about like the ship's systems or the economic system or the magic system, and I'm like, placeholder like magic or something like that.
Magic.
What do you do, Katie?
This works. I underwrite also. Like to a large degree, and tend to add a lot of stuff. Although there have been a couple of books where we've cut large chunks, or even I think it was the end of There Before the Chaos. We cut like 40,000 words off the end and moved it to the next book. And then I had to figure out like how
that's
to
there's
add.
something useful about writing series. You always can just be like, I'll just save
Right,
that.
we're like this end doesn't work, like it dragged on way too long, because that's a thing that I have problems with, is like how do you get out of a scene? How do you end this book? And so yeah, so I tend to, during edits, I do much the same thing in terms of where I will do an edit pass about halfway through the book and look and see like what needs to be wrapped up, what I missed, stuff that's mentioned, when you're like, he put the fork on the table in a very threatening manner in chapter 3, and then you never mention it again, and you're like, that fork was important, we need to do something about it. That type of stuff. And then I don't world build very much until like after the rough draft, generally.
High five. Me too.
I know. Like, I love world building. That's where we diverge. But
Yeah.
I am generally trying to tell the story of the people,
Yeah.
and then like after that, then I will go back through on subsequent edit passes and add in that type of stuff. But I've also noticed if you're focused on the people, you will often get world building regardless, because the people live in the world, and like they're inhabiting the world. They're going to tell you, what is important to them, what types of things will come out of it. So
yeah.
And
I definitely,
what's your world building?
my world building, I think probably similar to Katie's, where it kind of comes through the eyes of the characters. How much do I need to tell about the world for the world to make sense to the character, but also to, to make sure that you're telling the reader enough about it? Because sometimes something could be really familiar or very obvious to the character, but it's not something that the reader would know unless you tell them. So I think finding ways to build in world building through characters. I think in my book, a lot of the history is given through this one character that's a massive history nerd and just will not stop telling people stuff, and to the point where like people in the scene are like, okay, stop, we don't need a history lesson. But it's in there as well, like it's telling it to the reader as well as to the other characters. I think some of my technological world building, again, comes through having some of the characters who are scientists trying to explain things to people who are not. And I think that's also like another way to kind of do gentle technological world building, where they're like, okay, well, this isn't the precise scientific explanation, but I'll try and give it to you in the way that you would understand, to, a character that doesn't necessarily understand the theoretical physics behind it. So they'll use like an example of objects around them to like demonstrate how something works. And that, again, like is talking to other characters, but also to the audience. So I think a lot of my world building comes through scenes like that. And also, I mean, most of the main action of the book takes place on 2 ships in a void. And so there's not really a lot that you see there in terms of the other worlds in the galaxy, but you do get that through flashbacks. You get that through characters' memories and showing where they've been before. So again, you're very, very much in a POV when you get those worlds. And so I'm building not just the place, but what it meant to the people that inhabited it, and why are we being shown this memory? So I think it's very much character first. I definitely do have a lot of extra stuff, because I think where I meander and where stuff gets really big is I just write so much more that just doesn't go in, right? Like backstories and lots of pages and pages of things that happen to the characters and stuff that where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a whole story. And now it's reduced to like 1 sentence in the final book. So it's still, it's still in there. But if I'd like to talk about the 1 sentence that you took and turned into an entire book, Mike, out of the Star Wars universe, because I think there's very much stuff like that in my book where there is a whole story behind it. But I mean, you had to make that story up.
Well, so
can you tell us about that?
I will say that when we got the call, so I was talking with my editor for the first time, and it was like, okay, this is about Anakin and Obi-Wan. It's right after the Clone Wars start, so right after Episode 2. It is, and signed copies are available through Mysterious Galaxy. And they said, like, we would like you to do that business on Cato Nemoidia. So then I'm like, okay, well, that's like wide open. And I'm like, I love this kind of like cohesive tissue between like the way that the Star Wars franchise works, because, and like the upcoming Shadow of the Sith book coming up by Adam Christopher is like one really random line from The Rise of Skywalker where Lando talks about like, yeah, I was on this adventure with Luke Skywalker, and then they're like, they built a 200,000 word book about about that. So that was the assignment from the Del Rey team. But I got to people always ask like, how much latitude I actually had with it. I wrote a pitch right before my first call, like when I knew like roughly what it was going to be. They were just expecting like, oh, let's talk and like kind of get to know each other, and like, no, I have a 5,000 word synopsis. Can I read it to you right now? And that they're like, okay, wow, this guy's enthusiastic. And so I read it to them, and that actually became the bones of Brotherhood. And like, we added, the only thing that was really missing from that initial synopsis was Asajj Ventress was not in it, and it was because I didn't know that I could actually use her at that time. And then my editor was like, well, we feel like this really works. We need a central antagonist. Do you want to use Asajj Ventress? I'm like, I can do that? What? Yes, I will take her. So yeah, like the idea of that throwaway line and turning that into a whole book, that came from them. But the latitude they gave me about like how meaningful do we want to make that event? Like, is it just a joke event, or do we want to turn it into something that has a lot of weight for the characters? That was something that they gave me latitude to actually explore. So actually, I know we're talking about Star Wars, but I wanted to talk about Star Trek a little bit, because Ren, you say that like these different characters in your book have like these different assignments or like specialties, and the first thing that I think of, this is a Starfleet crew. And I know and then Katie, I know that there's all like when I read your work, like the first thing I thought of is like, I got like, oh, this is like a Han Solo adventure. Like that's kind of like how I felt like the vibe was. So like, how do you feel like external franchises and like the legacy of science fiction, how does that influence you?
For me, I mean, I think that Star Trek is definitely like in the bones of all of the science fiction that I write, and then the things that I create, because that was really my sort of my formative sci-fi show, specifically The Next Generation. And I think there's just a lot of concepts and things which I really started thinking about a lot as a writer and as a creator through different episodes, whether it's a time loop or whether it's, different ways of addressing causality or different scenarios in terms of how a group cast cooperates. And that's one of the things that I think has most strongly influenced all of my sci-fi is the way that all of the crew members bring something to that adventure, to the problem, and only by working together. Like oftentimes it's only when they finally start to talk to each other or exchange information, or when two people bring their ideas together, that you actually get enough to move forward with a problem. And that's definitely something that happens with the Galleon crew. However, they're definitely not a Starfleet crew in that they have zero preparation for this. Like, they're administrators on a science ship. They have not had like a course on what happens if you encounter a time anomaly. And I think that that's part of what creates some of the conflict in that crew, because some of them are very process driven. They are very, very corporate, and they're like, we don't have any precedent for this. We haven't done a risk assessment. We haven't done this and that. And other people are like, well, we kind of need to act now. We can't like check with headquarters and see whether we're allowed to do this. We have to act on our own. And I think that some of those characters really have to break out of that mold where they're very used to following a process and start to use the skills that they have and the tools that they have in new ways that they kind of made up on their own, which is also something we see a bit in Star Trek.
I do think like Star Wars was such a large part of my life. It came out like shortly after I was born, and one of the earliest memories that I have of seeing seeing a movie in the theater is the last Star Wars, or the last Star Wars, and then also E.T. oddly enough. So yeah, it's I don't know that I necessarily set out to write a Han Solo character in Hale Bristol, but I do think that that's definitely where she ended up, and so it's just I think that the media that we consume both influences the writing that we do, and also often kind of drives us to write something better, because as much as Leia was a formative part of my experience growing up and was such a lovely human being, played by Carrie Fisher, the weight distribution in terms of who gets to be the heroes in those movies is definitely weighted more towards the male side of things. So this was an opportunity for me to kind of change the balance on that and have it be something that is a little more balanced, or even a little more weighted on the other side.
And I will say I am totally not ashamed that every single one of my books that have released is there is one show or like several shows within a genre that have like directly influenced those, because it's just what I've been like watching at the time whenever like the idea pops up, and that's just how I work.
Yeah. It's funny because it sort of falls out of my head. I don't know if Ren does this, but like, yeah, I'll get sucked into it and then it will heavily influence it. Then I forget that it had anything on it until somebody asks me a question about it and is like, this is really reminiscent of X. And I'm like, oh yeah. By the way. Like I was binge watching the Untitled while I was
rewatching something later and being like, oh yeah, like I totally remember really being inspired by that to, write this character or that thing. And it's all in there, like everything that you enjoy and love about genre kind of marinates in there and eventually falls out in the form of something new.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. I am here to interrupt and say it is that time for the audience questions. For anyone out there who has still yet to put in a question, but they would like to, go ahead and click the link below that says ask a question, and we will hopefully get to it as long as it hasn't been already answered. So we're going to start with Kate, who says, it looks like a question for all of you. What did you find to be the most challenging, most fun thing about writing the science part of sci-fi? And I think we'll start with you, Ren.
The most challenging part or the most fun part? I'll just answer both of those things. I think that one of the things that I love the most about science, and specifically space science, is the enormous amount of possibility, the amount of things we really truly do not know and that we probably won't know in our lifetimes. And so sci-fi in particular just gives you that jumping off point to pull on a lot of those kind of theoretical threads and go somewhere pretty wild with it. And it maybe one day it's going to be completely disproven, or it might actually be true. Do we even know that the laws of physics work exactly the same in every universe? If there's multiple universes, like there's just so much that you can do. So I think that the most fun part is just that kind of playground, the vastness of what you can really explore and how you can kind of make anything exist if your story wants it to. On the challenging side is making sure that it still makes sense internally, that a reader can get what you were trying to do, right? To avoid things where there's just a bunch of technobabble that doesn't really mean anything or doesn't build anything in the story. As far as the reader's concerned, they should be able to kind of at least discern what you were getting at with it, and to kind of understand how that science works and understand that it's consistent within your universe, and just make sure that it doesn't take away from other parts of the story. If there's like bogged down in trying to understand something that was really just like flavor text or something, maybe it's too much. It doesn't need to be explained.
Yeah, nobody wants to read 18 pages of how the warp drive works. I'm sorry. Maybe
I have
some
an enterprise
people,
technical manual over there, so
that's what that's
but
for,
no, I
right?
don't want that in my
Right.
story.
You don't want it, right? I'm the
It's
one.
not
I
in
am
the book,
person
though.
who's like, did you just interrupt this space battle to tell me how the warp drive works? Like, please, I don't care how the weapons work. I just need you to like, please let's find out what the lieutenant's gonna do, because I'm pretty sure he was gonna die there. I honestly, I think the most challenging thing is figuring out where to draw that line. Because if, like I said, I don't write hard sci-fi. There is a market for it. Some people really enjoy it. It's not my bag. So figuring out, like Ren said, how to give the audience just enough information so that they know what is going on, without bogging the story down in an overwrought explanation about how XYZ works. The problem is you spend a lot of time sometimes investigating and researching that stuff, and you get really excited about it, so you want to put that in, and then you have to kind of reel yourself back in and be like, you know what, people know what warp drives are, you don't really have to explain it. Or people know what wormholes are, you don't really have to explain the technical aspects of how they work. And then the other part of your brain is like, but I spent a whole afternoon researching wormholes and now I want to tell everybody about it. So I think the most fun part of it is like making shit up. Like, you get to do some of this stuff. Like Ren said, we don't know that physics works the same in a multiverse. We don't know if silicone-based life forms are going to function exactly the same way as we do. You can do all sorts of stuff, and as long as you build a cohesive world that your readers can believe in, the technical aspects of that, they will suspend their disbelief and roll along with it, either because they care about the characters or because the world itself is so solid under their feet that they're okay with whatever you're spinning.
Yeah, I don't have much to add because those were very comprehensive answers. The only thing that I will say is I have an engineering degree, and like I'm a science brain. Like my whole life has really been thinking like in a scientific way. So, and I love math. Math is the best. So when I do like my world building, like I kind of like, it's really, really important for me to have like this sort of like, even if it's theoretical, I want that sort of like internal consistency. Like it really has to make sense to me. Like I really want it to feel like grounded in a way that like, oh, okay, well, in theory, like this could be in a textbook somewhere. So because to me that gives it enough life that it feels like I can stand on it. Because sometimes like when you see something on TV or like you read something and like they just say like they hand wave stuff, it's like, oh, you tried to explain it, but it's like there's not enough depth, and that just everything kind of falls apart. So I think I get really excited about that because I like to think about like how and why things work, but it is also challenging because you have to get that sort of like internal consistency that Katie was talking about. Like it has to be able to stand up on its own, otherwise you're going to lose a reader who's just going to question it, be like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So
Very fair. Thank you. We have another one that looks like is for everyone to answer. What are some of the most unique modes of time travel that you've either heard of or read of? We'll start with you, Ren.
Ooh, the most unique modes of time travel. As in like how, like a time machine?
I'm guessing just any particular mode of like, I traveled through time. What are some of the most unique ones that you've heard of, read of, like, be it magic or mysterious machine?
I'm trying not to say like a lot of unpublished things. Like there are so many.
Oh no.
I have read so many amazing unpublished time travel things, which I hope you'll get to see in the next 2 years or 3 years. So, I love things where it's an object, like something that actually is from the past, whether that is, it has to be like in a specific location or you have to do something with it. But overall, I just love accidental time travel. So something where someone connected with something from the past, or like went and redid something that hasn't been done since the last time it was done, and very unexpectedly is pulled into the past. I think there's just so many examples of that, but it's different types of objects or different places. I actually just watched, it was like an episode of a series that Steven Spielberg did. It was called Amazing Stories, and it was about this. Have you seen it? There's
I remember that from my childhood. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was like a more recent remake of it, I think, that like redid some of the older stories. And it was about, they were renovating this house, and he like just goes down into the basement like during a storm, and when he comes back out, it's like the past. He's gone back to the past, to when the house was still like, lived in, and somebody lives there. And he just kind of keeps hopping back and forth between times. Like every time there's a storm and he's in this specific spot, but then he's like trying to make it happen. And it's got to do with like a barometric pressure drop, and he's trying to be like in the exact right spot to do it. But the first time is accidental. And then after that, it's about him kind of trying to figure out how do you recreate this? And I think that always is, because it's a character focused time travel thing. I really, really love the POV in that. Like, how does someone deal with the idea that they've time traveled, and how do they try to figure out how to do it again, or how to undo it?
I will say the Star Trek version of that is the episode "The Visitor" in Deep Space Nine, when Ben Sisko kind of like gets trapped by, like, he touches like the warp core, or I forget what it was specifically, and then like his son ages, and like Ben phases in and out, and they're trying to like save him from like not keep disappearing, and then they have to figure out how to reset it. And it's one of the best emotional episodes of Star Trek. But I want to bring up a really excellent book by like the smartest person I know and a great friend. Annalee Newitz wrote The Future of Another Timeline, and in that, their time travel mechanism is geological based. So it's like these ancient rocks. And God, they explained it to me at one point, like, well, what it was. And I totally forget right now, because it's been a few years since I've read it. But that is like the most unique, like, time travel device source that I've ever encountered.
I love it. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention the TARDIS, simply because it's Who, and it is one of the more unique, like, time travel devices out there, even if it is very well known. Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Cue the, I can't make the noise. But one of my favorite, like, truly unique ones, there's a movie with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock from like the early 2000s called The Lake House.
The Lake House, yeah.
And the time travel element of it is the mailbox at the lake house, where these two characters are able to send letters to each other back and forth. And it's been so long. It was so funny the minute the question came up. My brain was like, do you remember the lake house? And I was like,
when I was in the question going, like, there was the mailbox thing, but I don't remember what it was until you started.
I had to look it up really quick just to make sure that it was, like Mike said, here we are.
Touching an object. Like, yeah, but the thing is, like, an object or a place, like, interacting with something.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
Oh, Mike just traveled to the future.
Love it.
Oh. Is this
Am I back?
Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, you're back.
I think for me, real quick, before we get to the next question, I did have a more recent favorite, like, interesting time travel one. If you've ever read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, it's by a Japanese author, Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I hope I said that right. And it was translated in English, and it's you have to go to a cafe, and there's an urban legend that if you sit at an exact chair and drink a cup of coffee, you will travel back in time in that same cafe.
Love it.
Yes. But it comes with
that's exactly it.
That's like an instant purchase.
And it comes with a very strict set of rules that I don't want to give away any part of the story, but I loved it. It gave me like Fantasy Island vibes. All right. Next one we have kind of connected. For all authors, wormholes or warp drives? Ren, first.
That GIF that says both.
We're all in agreement there, right?
Yeah.
Like, take the warp drive through the wormhole.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
DS9,
I have
the
flip
wormhole
flops.
next to
Like,
Deep Space Nine.
yeah, the Hale Bristol series is all about warp drives, and then the Neo G series uses wormholes. So I like, the concept of like manufactured wormholes versus natural wormholes is also a really fascinating science
yeah.
fiction debate, I think, because like
The
the
Wayfarers.
idea, yeah. But yeah, sorry, we're all like both. We're not gonna pick.
Perfect.
You cannot force
Easy
us
and
to
simple.
choose.
I can't choose my favorite child. Let's see here. So speaking earlier of filler words, all of you, what are some of your most favorite filler words you find yourself typing?
I think just is just like my
Yeah, just
killer
is a
word.
standard one. I think
Yeah.
everybody
Pretty
suddenly
much. I say pretty
suddenly
much a lot. I don't know why. Everybody in my book shrug. Like that. It was so bad in one of the books that the copy editor was like, I think there were like 60 instances, and she was like, I don't know what's going on here. And I was like, apparently nobody in this book knows what's going on either, because we're all like, it's fine.
Yeah,
I do
like
have a
adverbs.
smirk.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, smirk
Yeah,
is a
or
good one.
winking. You do tend to learn, just to like segue that into craft. I feel like, and you two can comment on this. I have learned to, like when you're using gestures or catchphrases for people or things, having to figure out when to narrow it down. And you can't have everybody in the book winking. Like, you want one character who's maybe kind of a winker, because otherwise everybody's walking around with like a twitch in their eye, and it just is weird. So yeah, like I have learned kind of over the years to like pull out those specific gestures sort of ahead of time as I'm writing, and then have this sort of running tabulation in my head, or sometimes even on paper, depending on how complicated the cast gets, to like who does what, which characters drink tea, which characters are going to be prone to like punching you in the arm, because they think it's a funny joke, versus ones are maybe not going to laugh at your joke at all, that type of stuff.
I have a craft thing to go off of that. One thing that I try to do really early on is I try to cast real actors into my roles right away, because then like when you're familiar with their work, like if you've seen them enough on TV or whatever, like you will know that like, do they actually smirk? And if they do, is it just one side, or is it both sides, or is it like a big smile? Like so those little ticks, I find that like the more I started to do that, the less like less repetition I had in my character gestures.
Yeah, I can't answer that at all. Like, I always get asked, like, who would you cast as character? Like, I don't know. I think I would cast like a completely unknown, actors that hadn't been in anything before, that would just kind of, oh, that's the actor that played somebody in Under Fortunate Stars, and they just become. But I don't know. I never really know what they look like as far as like specific face casts. But I have like a pretty good sense of their essence, like how, like you say, like who smirks, who punches somebody in the arm, and that kind of stuff. But I don't know that I could specifically relate them to a real actress. That's really interesting.
What about you, Mike, though? You mentioned it, you brought it up. Who have you cast in some of your roles, some of your character roles?
Oh gosh, so many. So in Here and Now and Then, like the lead, Ken Stewart, is played by Idris Elba. The lead female role in there is Jenna Coleman, who I have like the biggest crush on in the world. In We Could Be Heroes, the supervillain Jamie is played by Matt Smith. The superhero Zoe is played by Mina Wen. So it's like every book, every character, like every lead character, like I do that early on, and it is specifically like a shorthand, so I can hear the cadence of their vocal delivery and like see the way that they look. Like it was really strong for me in We Could Be Heroes, like writing Matt Smith very similar, like Doctor Who, Matt Smith, and like I'm writing his like opening dialogue, and I can just hear it. And then my editor was like, "This vocal work sounds very familiar." I'm like, "Oh, it's Matt Smith," and she goes, oh, "Okay, yeah, I totally get that."
What about you, KB? Have you Kitty?
Oh,
Is that Garrus?
It's a Garrus
Hi,
appearance.
Garrus.
This is my favorite cat
He's
on Zoom
so
right
unhappy
now.
about this situation.
This is like he's famous. This is like the paparazzi coming after him. It's like,
Right?
"Oh, come
Everybody's
on,"
always
I'm
like,
just-
"Want to see Garrus?" He's like, "I just came in to lay on the floor and I got suckered into." You know, I do a little bit of both. I was like, I gotta resort my brain after that. I have pulled. I tend to do like random searches for faces. For the characters that I want to do, like Jenks was actually just this this picture of this Mongolian woman that I found on the internet doing a Google search. Whereas I actually used Zendaya for Max's sort of like the build and gestures and movement type of stuff for the Neo G books. We I had a brief foray into a TV option for the Behind the Throne books. So I got asked this question quite a bit. And we hadn't really pulled anybody at that point because yeah, I tend to do the opposite of Mike, and my personal image of my characters is so strong already that I don't tend to pull like real people for any kind of facial stuff for that. But we did, and you know what? It's been so long now. I'd have to like do a search for the pictures that we pulled because I can't even remember who we were doing it.
I think we have time for one more question. Which one is not going to be too lengthy? Okay, so this one is actually going to be from Mike only because this says Mike. From Heidi, Mike, how did the premise for Light Years from Home come to you?
Oh, okay. So this is basically there's a song by this 90s indie rock band called Belly. Like the song is called Red, and the lyrics are about a boy who, because remember the 90s, like everyone was paranoid about like alien abduction. But the song is about a boy who wishes to get abducted by aliens so he can get away from his terrible life. And I always thought that that was such a really interesting concept of like this thing that is making everyone like paranoid in our pop culture, but this boy is using it as wish fulfillment. And I wrote a short story about that never went anywhere, but like it kind of like evolved when I watched the Haunting of Hill House Netflix series, because that was about how like this fantastical event fractures a family into two, and then you get like the past and the present. So I merged that short story with like the format of that TV series and like a lot of X-Files influences, and that's how that book came about.
Very cool. Well, we have hit the hour mark, everyone. So thank you. I know. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This has been such a wonderful event, and I knew that between the three of you, you'd have so much to say. I didn't want to interrupt because, like, I'm liking where this is going.
We maybe covered like 2 questions that we had in that document. We didn't need that. We just.
It's always good to have it.
It's good to have it.
Backups are great.
Just start talking about Star Trek. We'll be fine.
Ren, congratulations again on your book release.
Thank you.
Very good. And congrats, Mike, on Brotherhood, and KB, congrats on the paperback release of yours. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Yes, hold all the books up. Remember, everyone, if you haven't yet, you can still order your books through Mysterious Galaxy. There's a link below that says buy books and get signed book plates, and we'll make sure to match them up with you. But not only, but Under Unfortunate Stars also gets a swag pack because Ren sent great ones. Yes, again, those swag packs. And we still have them at the store, so we can get those to you, even if you just come in and stop by and buy one. All right. I wish everyone a great evening or great day wherever you are in the world, and I hope you all have
Thank you.
great one. Bye. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.